Welcome back to the deep dive. We are genuinely excited about the material we're digging into today.
Me too. It really gets to the heart of how we make decisions, especially, when other people are around.
Absolutely. Today we're focusing on the final chapter, Chapter 13, Beer and Free Lunches, from Dan Ariely's fantastic book, Predictably Irrational.
A classic in the field.
Right. And our mission here, for you listening, is really to unpack the key ideas from just this chapter. We'll look at a cool experiment about group influence.
The beer experiment, yeah.
Exactly. And define behavioral economics, see how it differs from standard economics, and crucially, figure out where these free lunches might actually be hiding.
And yeah, some of the findings about how much others affect us might surprise you. It definitely makes you think.
Okay, let's jump in. The chapter starts by setting the scene for this key experiment at the Carolina Brewery.
Right, on Franklin Street near UNC Chapel Hill. Ariely paints a good picture, sort of a hip bar, brick buildings, old trees, those big steel beer vats inside. You can imagine it.
Definitely sounds like a place you'd ponder human behavior over a drink.
Well, that's exactly what Ariely and his colleague Jonathan Lavav did. They started wondering, does the actual order people choose in, say, when ordering drinks one by one, does that change what they pick?
Okay, so does sequence matter?
That was the first question. And then if it does, how? Does it make people, conform, pick the same thing?
Or does it push them the other way, towards being different?
Exactly, nonconformity. And maybe the most important part, does being influenced like this actually make people happier or less happy with their choice in the end? Does it affect their enjoyment?
Right, the actual experience. So how did they test this?
They designed an experiment on the spot, basically, offering free beer samples to the brewery customers.
Nice perk for the customers.
Definitely. And they chose 4 specific beers: Copperline Amber Ale, Franklin Street Lager, an India Pale Ale, and a Summer Wheat Ale.
A decent variety there.
Yeah. The book describes them: amber, lager, hoppy IPA, a wheat beer with sort of banana notes.
Yeah.
Distinct options.
Okay, and the conditions. How did they compare things?
2 main conditions. For some tables, they'd go over, describe the beers, and then ask each person out loud, one after the other, what they wanted.
That's the public sequential order.
Right. For the other tables, same beer description, but then they just gave everyone a little menu and asked them to write down their choice privately.
Ah, so no hearing what others picked before you choose.
Exactly. No immediate social pressure.
Yeah.
They also watched if people shared. Apparently, they mostly didn't, and gave a quick survey afterwards.
Asking if they liked the beer. Any regrets?
Yep. Liking and regret. And there's this funny little side story in the chapter, too.
Oh, yeah.
Ariely was actually acting as one of the servers for the experiment, and he runs into an old colleague, Rich.
Oh.
Yeah, and Rich clearly thinks Ariely has, switched careers and become a beer server. Asked him if he ever finished his PhD.
Oh, that's awkward.
Totally. Ariely had to kind of play along to not blow the experiment's cover. It just shows how hands-on this research was.
That's great. So after spending, $1,400 on beer, they had trouble expensing?
Apparently so.
What did they actually find out from all this?
Well, the first major finding was really clear. How people ordered drastically changed what they ordered.
Okay.
In those groups ordering out loud, one by one, people chose way more different kinds of beer across the table compared to the groups writing orders privately.
So less overlap. If 4 people ordered out loud, you'd see more like 3 or 4 different beers chosen.
Exactly. More variety seeking in public. And the why seems to be about that public declaration. When you hear Sarah choose the IPA and then John chooses the lager,
You might feel you need to pick something else.
right, there's this subtle pressure maybe to show you're an individual or you have your own taste or you're not just copying. So you might end up picking, say, the wheat ale, even if you initially fancied the lager John just took.
Ah, okay. So the public setting pushed towards differentiation or nonconformity. But did that make them happier with their wheat ale? That was finding 2, right?
And that's where it gets really interesting. The answer was generally no. People who ordered out loud were, on average, less satisfied with their beer choice than those who ordered privately.
Less happy. Wow. So choosing to be different actually backfired in terms of enjoyment.
Pretty much. It seems like they were choosing to signal something uniqueness, but then they were stuck with a beer they didn't like as much. Sacrificing personal enjoyment, or what the book calls personal utility.
For the sake of appearances.
Yeah, for reputational utility, how they look to the group.
Was anyone in that public group happy, though?
Yes. And this is important. The very first person to order in the public group. Their happiness level was basically the same as the private ordering group.
Because they weren't influenced by anyone yet, they got to pick what they actually wanted, just like the private group.
Exactly. They essentially made a private choice in public. And they did follow-up studies, too, one with wine and MBA students at Duke. That allowed them to measure personality stuff. And they found that the people who tended to pick differently in public also scored higher on a trait called need for uniqueness.
So some people are just more wired to want to stand out even if it costs them a bit of enjoyment.
It seems so. And, interestingly, it's not always about standing out. They ran a similar study in Hong Kong.
Different results.
Different mechanism, same outcome of less enjoyment. In Hong Kong, where the culture tends to value conformity more, people ordering publicly also ended up less happy with their choices compared to private ordering. But in this case, it was often because they conformed more to what others picked, choosing something popular even if it wasn't their top preference.
Wow. So public ordering can lead to regret either by pushing you to be too different or by pushing you to conform too much, depending on the cultural context.
Exactly. Either way, the social influence led to a less enjoyable outcome for the individual compared to just choosing privately based on preference.
It's fascinating how much that social layer matters, even for something simple like picking a drink.
It really is.
Okay, so let's bring this back home. For you listening, what does this beer experiment actually mean for, say, your next group dinner or coffee order?
Well, it gives us some pretty simple practical advice. Maybe the first free lunch from the chapter.
Okay, what is it?
First, if you know what you want, try to decide before the server comes around. And then, stick to it. Try not to get swayed by what the last 3 people ordered.
Commit to your choice beforehand.
Right. Second strategy. If you're worried you will get swayed or someone will steal your choice, maybe announce your intended order to the table before the waiter even gets there.
Oh, like stake your claim early?
Kind of. It might make you feel less pressure to switch when the official ordering happens. You've already put it out there.
That's clever, sort of preempting the public pressure and based on the experiment.
The easiest advice is often just try to order first if you can.
Simple as that. Avoid the influence altogether.
Yeah. And the authors even toss out the idea that maybe restaurants could make customers happier by just having them write orders down privately. Small change, potentially happier diners.
A potential win-win. Okay, so this experiment and the others in the book, they point to something bigger, right? About economics.
Absolutely. This is where the chapter really contrasts standard economics with behavioral economics.
So what's the standard view? How does traditional economics see us?
Standard economics basically assumes we're rational, highly rational. We have all the info, or act like we do. We logically weigh options, calculate values, maximize our utility.
We make sensible choices.
We make sensible choices, learn fast from mistakes, and markets are efficient because rational people operate within them.
And that leads to the idea of no free lunches, right?
Exactly. In standard economics, a free lunch, an easy, obvious way to get a benefit for little cost, shouldn't really exist. If it did, some rational person would have already grabbed it and the opportunity would disappear. Markets eliminate easy wins.
But behavioral economics looks at the beer experiment and says something different.
Completely different. Behavioral economics says, hold on, look at how people actually behave. We're influenced by context, emotions, social norms, how things are framed. We have systematic biases. We're predictably irrational.
Not just randomly irrational, but in ways we can predict.
That's the key. It's based on observation of real human behavior, quirks and all. Now, hearing we're predictably irrational might sound, I don't know, a bit depressing.
Yeah, like we're flawed machines.
But the flip side, the really optimistic part of behavioral economics, is that if our mistakes are systematic and predictable,
we can identify them and maybe fix them.
Precisely. We can study when and why we mess up. And that understanding allows us to find ways to do better. We use strategies or tools or design environments differently. And that is where behavioral economics finds its free lunches.
Okay, so behavioral economics free lunch isn't literally free stuff.
No, not usually. It's more like a tool or a system or a policy design that creates a net benefit. The cost might be small, but the gain in terms of helping people overcome their biases and make choices closer to what they actually want or need in the long run is significant. It improves well-being by working with our predictable irrationalities.
Got it. And the chapter uses saving for retirement as a great example of this difference in perspective.
Perfect example. Standard economics might look at low saving rates and say, well, people are just rationally choosing to spend now instead of save. That's their preference. They're saving the right amount for them.
No problem to solve, just individual choices.
Right. But behavioral economics looks and sees, well, people say they want to save more, but they procrastinate, or they get overwhelmed by complex choices, or they value today way more than the distant future. It's hard to sacrifice now for later. These are predictable hurdles.
Yeah, future you feels like a different person sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah. So the behavioral solution isn't just telling people to be more rational, it's designing something that helps them overcome those hurdles, like the Save More Tomorrow program.
Ah, yes, Thaler and Bonartzi's program. How did that work again? It was quite clever.
It's brilliant in its simplicity. You ask employees if they'd like to commit to increasing their retirement savings rate, but not starting today.
Starting with their next pay raise.
Exactly. You commit a percentage of future raises. Psychologically, it's much easier to give up money you haven't actually received yet than to cut your current spending.
Loss aversion, right? You don't feel the loss of money you never quite had in your hands.
Precisely. And then inertia works for you. Once you're in, the savings happen automatically with each raise.
And the results were pretty dramatic.
Hugely dramatic. The chapter mentions cases where average saving rates went from something like 3.5% up to 13.5% over several years.
Wow, that's a life-changing difference for retirement.
Absolutely. It benefits the employees, their families, potentially reduces burden on social systems, maybe even helps the company. It's a clear net gain for everyone involved, achieved by understanding and leveraging psychology. That's a behavioral free lunch.
It really shows the power of applying these insights practically. Okay, so zooming out, what are the big overarching lessons Ariely wants us to take from this chapter and maybe the whole book?
I think there are two main ones. First is just how profoundly we are influenced by forces we often don't even notice.
Like emotions, context, social norms, what others are doing.
Exactly. And these influences aren't random. They cause systematic, predictable errors in our judgment. He calls them decision illusions, like optical illusions for the mind. Our perception of reality, and thus our choices, are filtered through these predictable biases.
And that leads to that striking line. We're like pawns in a game whose forces we largely fail to comprehend.
Yeah, it's a powerful image. It sounds a bit bleak, maybe.
But the second lesson offers some hope, right?
It absolutely does. Okay, so we're predictably irrational. But we're not helpless. Because these errors are systematic, we can learn to recognize the situations where we're most vulnerable.
We can be more vigilant.
We can be more vigilant. We can try different strategies, maybe use checklists or rules. And importantly, especially for businesses or policymakers, we can design systems and environments that counteract these biases or nudge us in better directions.
That's where the potential for those designed free lunches comes in again, building better systems that account for real human behavior.
Exactly. It's about being smarter about our own limitations and designing around them. You can feel Ariely's enthusiasm for just understanding why we do the weird things we do. He quotes someone saying, "Think how hard physics would be if particles could think."
Huh, that's good. We humans add a whole layer of complexity.
We certainly do.
It definitely gives you a new perspective on everyday choices. Okay, so drawing this all together, maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. Thinking about this chapter, the beer, the uniqueness, the conformity, the retirement savings, where in your own life might you be, perhaps unconsciously, sacrificing some personal enjoyment or a long-term goal because you're focused on how things look to others, or because you're just going with the flow?
Or, flipping that around, where could applying a simple behavioral insight, maybe about commitment or defaults or framing, create a small but meaningful free lunch, a net benefit for yourself or in a system you're part of?
Something to ponder.
Definitely.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into beer and free lunches from Predictably Irrational. We really hope exploring these ideas about how our minds work has been interesting and maybe even useful.
It's always fascinating stuff. Thanks for diving in with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll be back soon exploring another topic. Hope you'll tune